The Renaissance, Sir Francis Bacon, Part 9, Introduction and Biography. Professor Michael Botwin, Department of Psychology, California State University, Fresno. Bacon was quite an accomplished man. He was a scholar and a politician. He also was a scientist. Some people believe he may actually be the author of Shakespeare's plays, but one thing we're going to find out is that he was an extreme anti-authoritarian in terms of intellectual issues. He worked his way up to Lord Chancellor in the royal court, quite high position, but he had some enemies that trumped up some bribery charges. He ended up spending 4 days in the Tower of London, but considering the times, he was lucky enough to keep his head, and he had to retire from public life in disgrace at that point. But it didn't stop him from continuing his intellectual efforts and his study of what science should be. Now, unlike other individuals at the time who were developing a deductive experimental science, Bacon was out to devise an inductive science. And he was very radical in terms of his views. First of all, he said science should be concerned with the facts of observation, and only with those facts. Anything extraneous, bad stuff. And if you remember inductive reasoning from previous lectures, you start with a specific case and generalize, where most people at that time were doing science in just the opposite way. But one thing you'll learn about Bacon, he had his way of doing things, and damned if he wasn't going to do them his way. Now, Bacon had some very good points, and I find him an extremely interesting individual. He believed that preconceived theories led to biased hypotheses. So you shouldn't approach something with an a priori hypothesis. You should first assemble facts. His branch of reasoning was radical empiricism. And Bacon believed that radical empiricism is fundamentally based on the observation of nature. Once you acquire enough facts, then you can build your model about how something works. He distrusted the primary form of philosophy at the time, rationalism, because he believed that it was biased in many different ways. First of all, he believed that rationalism was biased in the way they used words. Later, when we talk about Bacon's famous 4 idols, we'll talk about how he thought words could be misused. He also believed that biases could be introduced by using symbols in mathematics, and the biases of the symbols were just as bad as the biases of a word. Bacon believed that observations can be classified only after you've gained a body of evidence. Bacon believed there were 4 sources of error that could happen in different observations. And in his discussion of those vices, his goal was to circumvent the inherent or acquired mental vices. Vice being a negative thing. His goal was to demonstrate the undesirability of relying on assumptions that have not been verified by observation and experimentation. Now, Bacon was an extremely practical scientist. Bacon was ever the practical scientist, as we just said, and that literally killed him. He was traveling by carriage in the dead of winter, looking out and observing the landscape. He got the idea that meat may be preserved if it's packed in ice and frozen. So he pulled his carriage off at the side of the road and had his footman buy him a chicken. And Descartes went outside, stuffed the bird with ice, and found out that, yes, indeed, it did preserve the meat. However, it didn't preserve Sir Francis, who succumbed to pneumonia several days after his experiment. So, you want to see a good video on this, if you click the link here, it will also be embedded in the PowerPoint posted to Canvas. You see a little comedy sketch by the British. It's a BBC thing called Stupid Deaths, part of the Horrible History series, which are primarily little history lessons for kids, although I find them very amusing myself. I had it embedded into the video, but the BBC and YouTube did not like that. So I've had to take it out, and there's a link here for your convenience. So, let's finish up Sir Francis. As we've already said, he believed in practical science, and he stuffed a chicken, and it didn't do well for him. But the thing we really want to remember is that he insisted that science should not approach problems with pre-existing biases. And these pre-existing biases are embodied in his 4 idols. And we'll look at those in the next set of videos on the Renaissance. So we'll see you next time on the history of psychology. Bye now. This has been a We Have Couches video production. Copyright 2020. Professor Michael Botwin. All rights reserved.